Question orale. L'honorable député.
The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Tomorrow, the NDP Liberal government will willingly increase inflation in Canada by stubbornly maintaining its carbon tax height. That's not nothing. Everything that needs to be shipped will cost more, and in exactly 1 week, the Minister of Finance will table the first NDP Liberal coalition budget. More spending, more intrusion in areas under provincial jurisdiction, no plan to return to balanced budget. NDP members are applauding, but the silence of the Liberal MPs speaks louder than that. Why are they staying silent when Canadians are asking for some respite? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, for a number of years, we have and are delivering on promises to Canadians. In other words, that we would be there for them to support them. And this week, in fact, we are continuing this work with significant announcements on the fight against climate change and significant announcements on reconciliation, and also major announcements on daycare services across the country, $10 per day in the next 5 years. And we on this side of the House are continuing to work for Canadians, and we're continuing to focus on them. The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. The NDP Liberals tomorrow will ensure that life costs more for all Canadians by increasing the carbon tax. When this left-wing government boasts about the economy, it forgets to say that the current hike in inflation is generating billions in additional revenues for the government. Next week, the government will have a choice. Use these revenues to help Canadian families by reducing taxes, or implement the NDP election platform. The Prime Minister has to pick families or his own political future. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, all Canadians, apparently except Conservative politicians, know that the cost of inaction against climate change will be far more expensive than investments and responsible parameters. We know that putting a price on carbon and not letting it be free to pollute is the right way to move forward, not only to protect our planet for our kids and grandkids, but also to help growth and create good jobs. It's only the Conservative members who believe that we believe that the economy and the environment go together. The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. On another subject, Mr. Speaker, no one believes this Prime Minister anymore when he says he's a feminist. The General Vance case shows that the Prime Minister has a double talk. The Canadian Forces Ombudsman informed the clerk, the Minister, and the Office of the Prime Minister about the General's actions. The Ombudsman was right, and the Minister of Defence did nothing, nor did the Prime Minister. How can victims trust this Prime Minister, who instead of taking action and punishing inappropriate and unacceptable behaviour, has turned a blind eye and blamed others? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the men and women serving within the Canadian Armed Forces deserve an environment that protects them, supports them, and provides them the resources that they need in order to ensure that they will have the necessary support in case of misconduct. We must also transform the culture within the Canadian Forces, which we are doing. Yes, it's a lot of work and it is taking too long, but we will continue to focus on this every day in order to ensure that the Canadian Armed Forces can be there for all those who decide to serve their country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. General Vance, this sad, sick story is not just about his conduct. The Ombudsman told the clerk, the Minister, the Prime Minister's office, and collectively they turned a blind eye. Instead of being investigated, charged, and disciplined, the General was extended in his post and given a raise. Instead of removing the Minister, the Prime Minister reappointed him to Cabinet and supported the cover-up. Why?
Unbelievable. Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
From the very beginning, we've been focused on ensuring that the Canadian Armed Forces work environment and culture is worthy of the women and men who choose to serve the armed forces. We need to make sure that we are continuing to transform the culture, continuing to create supports and resources for everyone who serves in the armed forces. No one should be in a toxic work environment. No one should face harassment, intimidation, but particularly not people who are choosing to set their lives on the line for their country.
The honourable member for South Surrey White Rock.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the victims of General Vance would agree with the Prime Minister today. When the Ombudsman went to the former Defence Minister and told him that General Vance was engaged in sexual misconduct and harassment, the former Defence Minister showed the Ombudsman the door. Instead of launching an investigation, as he was obligated to do, the Minister told General Vance about his accusations and gave him a raise. How does this government expect survivors to feel comfortable coming forward with this track record of protecting a perpetrator who has abused his power?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Once again, as a government, we have demonstrated through our actions, through our support, through our investments, the need to ensure safe working environments for everyone, including and especially people who choose to serve their country through Canadian Armed Forces. Obviously, we fundamentally disagree with the characterizations and the picture painted by the members opposite, who are trying to score cheap political points on the fact that we need to, all of us, work together to transform for the better the culture of the armed forces, and that's what we're doing.
Order.
The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government has allowed for the loosening of restrictions on visas for refugees coming to Quebec or Canada. Now, we mustn't let the wealth of refugees be a criteria. It's about fairness, about ensuring that people who are vulnerable are not made more vulnerable. The solution seems to be a humanitarian airlift. Is the Prime Minister in agreement to put in place immediately an airlift? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to be there for Ukraine and Ukrainians fleeing war. We are acting as quickly as possible and as efficiently and safely as possible to allow them to come to Canada. And there is no limit on the number of applications. All those who come to Canada under these measures will be allowed to have open work permits and will be able to quickly get to work if they wish. Canadians stand in solidarity with Ukrainians, and we will continue to welcome them with open arms. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, the Canadian government is promoting inclusion and fully subscribes to that. To do that, there are positive measures. For example, anonymous candidacy when you're looking at assessing candidates, or subsidies for some candidates. Exclusion, however, is unhealthy and it is divisive. Does the Prime Minister agree that when it comes to research, exclusion is not the solution? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, our government has always supported scientists and researchers who play a crucial role in our country's progress, including in fighting COVID-19. Our investments and our programs support science and research that is of international renown. We will provide the additional resources necessary to all researchers and scientists and to position Canada as a leader in innovation. We will continue to support a scientific and research ecosystem that is solid and that reflects all of the talents of all Quebecers and all Canadians. The Honourable Member for Rosemount Petite Patrie. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals have folded like a cheap suit yet again before the oil and gas sector, when the Prime Minister promised the entire world that he would reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Yet this week, he promised to increase oil production instead of investing in green energy and jobs. The Liberals are giving preferential treatment to the oil companies who will get rich at the expense of our environment. This is unacceptable, offensive, and flies in the face of the climate emergency. Why is this government giving gifts to major oil companies while the entire planet is burning? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, our plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions is one of the most exhaustive in the world. We have outlaid in a credible fashion the way that each sector must act in order to meet our climate targets. They're ambitious targets. I'm not the only one to say it. The Canadian Climate Institute, Equiterre, Clean Prosperity, and other scientists have all approved our plan. We promised an ambitious and achievable plan that will allow us to reduce pollution and create possibilities for Canadians, and that is exactly what our plan will allow us to do. We will always be there to fight against climate change and support the middle class.
Honourable member for Timmins James Bay.
Well, at COP26, this Prime Minister promised the world he'd finally put a cap on greenhouse gas emissions, but if you look at his new climate scheme, you can scratch that promise because he's given billions to the oil lobby to increase production on the fantasy of capturing carbon. That public money should be invested in energy workers to create a truly Canadian clean energy revolution. We have the skill to do this, but we have a Prime Minister who's broken every climate promise he has made. Doesn't he get it? That the clock is ticking, the planet is burning, and the window of opportunity is rapidly closing.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we just put forward the most ambitious and concrete emissions reduction plan this country has ever seen. Every part of the country and every sector of our economy has a critical role to play to meet our 2030 climate targets. As we made clear in the last election, we will cap emissions from oil and gas and ensure the sector reaches net zero by 2050. Our plan is informing our approach to cap and cut for emissions from oil and gas, and consultations are ongoing to make sure we design the right approach for Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Abbotsford.
Well, tomorrow it's April Fool's Day, and the Prime Minister is raising carbon taxes again. That adds another 11 cents to the litre of gasoline. Excise taxes are going up, CPP premiums are going up, GST revenues are going up, interest rates are going up, and all of these increases are driving inflation and the cost of living for Canadians. Does the Minister not realize that inflation is spiraling out of control, and will Canada's first NDP budget deliver a plan to fight inflation?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister of Tourism and Associate Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let's recall a bit of history here. Canada entered this crisis in a strong fiscal position, allowing the government to take decisive action to put in place the supports that Canada needed during the worst health crisis in a century. Our response to COVID, $511 billion invested in the lives, the livelihoods, the communities, the provinces of this country, kept people in their homes and in their jobs. Mr. Speaker, while the other side is fighting itself over leadership, we're going to keep fighting for Canadians and affordability every day.
The Honourable Member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola.
Mr. Speaker, first-time homebuyers with good wages want to get out of their parents' basements. It's a slap to the face to find out that Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation now offers government-backed mortgages with a 50-year amortization to landlords, yet denies first-time homebuyers a 25-year mortgage. Why is this SpendDP Liberal coalition fighting for more spending and lending to help the profits of big corporate landlords while leaving millennials out in the cold?
The Honourable Minister of Housing.
Mr. Speaker, maybe the Honourable Member needs to have a conversation with his colleague from Stormont, Dundas, South Glengarry, who stood up in the House last week and said that we should not help first-time homebuyers. He should have a conversation with his member from Calgary Centre, who said we should cut back on the National Housing Strategy. He should help the Honourable Member from Mission, Matsqui, Fraser Canyon, who tries to table the platform in this House and can't find the term affordable housing in the Conservative plan. That's their record, Mr. Speaker.
Order. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Edmonton Riverbend.
Mr. Speaker, the Bank of Montreal is now saying there's a full-scale attack on Canadian home prices. Banks are raising interest rates and housing inventory is at an all-time low. The budget's next week, Mr. Speaker, and the average Canadian home price is a staggering $868,000. To the Minister, how much of this budget will Canadians actually be able to afford?
The Honourable Minister of Housing.
We are moving ahead to make sure that we implement the Housing Accelerator Fund to offer more housing supply. We are enhancing and committed to enhancing the first-time homebuyer incentive and making sure that we move forward on an innovative rent-to-own program that will turn more Canadian renters into homebuyers. But what did they do? They voted against a tax on foreign-owned, non-recreational residential properties. They are on record in saying that we should pull back investments through the National Housing Strategy. They are on record in talking down the first-time homebuyer incentive, a program that will help more Canadians become homeowners, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member